embedded in the ice, so that when the blue flash lights up, then the detector triangulates the position from whence the neutrino came from. And the idea is that they then tell all the other science facilities on the planet where to aim their telescopes and detectors of all sorts to find where this neutrino came from. That's what we're told. What I have found in my experience traveling to the South Pole, connecting the dots, is that this detector also transmits. This is a big deal because it's the difference between, you know, catching and pitching. It's two different actions. I don't know how to express this to people, how important it is, and I'm trying to get this information out there. I have on my website in the archives, there is a document that shows, this is not my conjecture, this is from the manufacturer specs on the Ice Cube neutrino detector, stating clearly that each DOM, 5,160 of them, has the capacity to also transmit at up to 2,047 watts, or volts. Now my brain is going amiss, but regardless, at that level, 2,047 times 5,160 is now the power output potential of this device, which makes this a huge phased array system, which now puts it on a directed energy weapons capacity list, which now has the full complement of all attributes that a directed energy weapon could be doing, and more due diligence is now required to figure out precisely what it is doing. What I do believe, which I have more documentation on the website, is that one of the things they would definitely be doing with it as a torsion field generator is using it for instantaneous interstellar communication. So when we as a planet put our forces out galactically and intergalactically to be able to travel at or beyond the speed of light, gives us a communications problem to overcome. So if I put you in a ship and I send you out 100 light years in one direction, how do we communicate to each other? We need really fancy comms, and it appears this system functions for that.
Wow, that's really interesting. And it makes a lot of sense because we've been hearing for decades, that things have been going on in Antarctica, in particular regarding space. And they've been taking off, you know, there's what people say, there's stargates down there, there's spaceports, whatever the case may be. That might be one of the only real launching places to get to space, you know, just depending on who you talk to. But there's something going on down there, and it would only make sense that they're doing that. And so it's probably multi-purpose, right? It's just like a 5G tower. It's not just for your cell phones. It could be doing a million things all the way down, you know, to weaponry, you know, V2K technology, voice to skull, which we know is real just from, that was actually on the Army's website at one time before they removed it, but you could read all about it, and they admitted that they have a technology that can beam a frequency into somebody's head and make them hear voices and a bunch of other things. And I
couldn't agree with you more. I would add that to the list of things that I am concerned with contemporarily as an activity being transmitted out of there. I mean, I can look around the world at me right now. I'm sure you guys wouldn't really disagree, but it sure seems to me like everybody's out of their mind doing what someone else is telling them to do.
Right.
Yes, exactly.
So to me, I'm trying to let people know that I was there from 2010 to 2011, and it took me a long time to figure out everything that's going on. And you're right, things are compartmentalized. I was very lucky to be in a maintenance position where I got to go into all the different compartments. Most people aren't that lucky. Most people don't have the past that I had to connect the dots. So this is, I think we're really lucky that I got there and saw this stuff, because this is problematic. This is exactly what directed energy weapons do. There's a gentleman by the name of Dr. James Giordano who went and spoke to the cadets at West Point. And it was about that we are in a state of the battlefield of the mind and all of these technologies that exist. He wasn't talking to them about potentials and possibilities. He was talking to them as leaders of the military in the future about real threats that existed right now. And how they were going to have to learn to deal with these existing threats. And I'm just finding technology that supports what he was saying was technical potential threat from a foreign nation. And I'm just finding it as an American within our own borders, so to say, that the tech is present.
So I think I heard in one of your other interviews, you mentioned the ELF system is online. The breaker wasn't supposed to be on, but it was. And ELF is extremely low frequencies for people who don't know. And what does that mean to you? I mean, we've heard that this affects, wildlife and all kinds of things.
To me, it means first and foremost, they have submarine communications going on that they're denying is actively occurring. So that's primary mission number one, I imagine, is going on, which makes sense that they don't want to talk about that. Second to that, I do believe that it is a component of a grander frequency modulation that is intended towards the mind of the populace. Straight up, I think these are all components, that each component has its primary mission, second and tertiary missions that they don't talk about. And then each of these items is also a component potentially of a bigger system that is certainly never discussed. What happens when you take a HARP system that's located in Gakona, Alaska, and you mate that system to the ice cube neutrino detector that's now transmitting in its phased array capacity? We have to start asking questions about what potentially is available, and that's exactly what I'm getting at, is that folks aren't having these conversations. They don't know what any of these components are that I'm talking about, and because of that, since they don't see bullets in their neighbors, they don't think that there's war going on.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah. It's like a stealth war.
Absolutely. This is weapons of a different array, literally and figuratively. These are on a frequency level. We don't see when someone's shooting a microwave beam at you. Yet we are getting reports from the Department of Defense that Havana syndrome is real, and they have released documentation recently to all of their personnel so that they know how to properly identify and run up their chain of command any circumstances of directed energy weapon, Havana syndrome, that they might be suffering.
Let's talk about that. I wanted to bring that up, and I actually have a brief definition of Havana syndrome pulled up. And I think it's peculiar that it only targets U.S. diplomats. That's the definition. It only targets U.S. government officials and military personnel. Nobody else. Why only U.S. diplomats? And even mainstream articles admit that this could be related to microwave weaponry. That's huge. They're admitting this. And it's really interesting that just recently Kamala Harris was suffering from Havana syndrome. And I wonder what's going on.
I didn't even know that.
Right. Yeah. Not many people did. It just kind of slipped under the radar. All the symptoms. I'll just read the definition. Havana syndrome is a set of medical symptoms with unknown causes experienced mostly abroad by U.S. government officials and military personnel. The symptoms range in severity from pain and ringing in the ears to cognitive difficulties, and were first reported in 2016 by U.S. and Canadian embassy staff in Havana, Cuba. And people have just been around the world claiming to have these symptoms. And
that's a really short list right there. That's a condensed list.
Right. Well,
symptoms.
Yeah, you can exactly. Well, this is extremely brief, but share what you know about it, and then I'll add my theory.
Well, I believe first and foremost, let's just call it what it is. Havana syndrome is a directed energy weapons attack.
Right.
You know? So it's like saying somebody has a bullet hole in them. Well, they got shot by a gun. Let's just be straight with what's going on. So if you have Havana syndrome symptoms, you got shot at a directed energy weapon. So let's just start being straight in these types of conversations so that we can bring the world into the reality of the battlefield of the mind that we're in right now. That's where I would start with.
Yeah.
Because people need to understand what's really going on. There is a technological set of weapons that people don't even know exist right now.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
So my friend, well, a lot of our listeners know who she is, Kate Awakening. So she did a little dig on this. Once she saw that Kamala Harris was affected by this, she started looking at who else has been said to have Havana syndrome. And she's like, all these people aren't just U.S. diplomats, but they're all, from what our understanding is, members of what we call the deep state. And she's thinking, well, what if somehow we have control of this weaponry and we're targeting, we took their weapon and we're now using it against them in certain areas, maybe not in the US, but whenever they're abroad and whenever they're overseas or whatever, maybe a faction of the military has control of these towers or whatever, and maybe they're affecting.
I can follow what you're saying, but I'm just going to add one caveat. All sides at a higher level have these technologies. So I kind of see what you're saying, but in a way it's like they all have it, but yet I see what you're saying. It's like one side is winning compared to the other right now.
It's a theory.
Which is good.
It's a theory, obviously, just a theory, but
yeah, but I think that's a common error that most people think. They think that like there's like this one place that, you know, the coronavirus exists. And it's not that, you know, a coronavirus existed, and then that technology made it to another faction, into another faction, into another faction. And then just like with the CIA and the DIA with the remote viewing programs, you know, it starts in one place and at one time, but then people become aware of things. And next thing you know, there's a DIA funded program. Next thing you know, there's an NRO funded program, and we got remote viewers all over the place now.
Exactly. Yeah, I believe that. Like, I've heard the argument, people say, oh, I heard Project Looking Glass was shut down and not using it anymore. I'm like, do you really believe that? Do you really believe that?
It's what they say, yeah.
Right. That's one, like, it would be like, so let's just say like you guys were working on Project Looking Glass, and all of a sudden they're like, we're shutting this down. That means that you got defunded.
Yeah.
You're out of the loop. They're now taking your gear and handing it to somebody else, and it still continues.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like Facebook claiming that they're no longer collecting data on facial recognition.
Yeah. Oh, it's meta something or other now, so everything's cool.
Yeah.
Everything's back to awesome now.
Small smoke screen, yeah.
Yeah, come on.
Facebook itself was just a renamed of LifeLog.
Exactly. It was a whole intel gathering operation to begin with.
They just renamed LifeLog, and then
everything
available to everyone.
Everything that everybody offered on Facebook would have been illegal for an intel agency to gather without you offering it. It's that simple. Right. Nothing is stopping any intel agency from manufacturing a software program that you then offer your information on. It's that simple.
Exactly. And then they even like, nobody reads the fine print, but when you download these apps, it tells you, like, can we access this? Can we access that? And then there's a whole agreement that no one reads, and you just click because you're so excited to use the app, you don't even care.
Here's an interesting aspect of how these organizations get funded that most people don't consider. So we have a group, like the wonderful group known as the CIA. Every year they get a check cut to them from Congress to cover their operating expenses, right? They're funded. What it is for shits and giggles that they get a check cut to them for $1 trillion. Everybody imagines that $1 trillion check goes into a bank account, and then they make withdrawals over the course of the year so they can cover expenditures like it's being run like a business. Nobody considers that they might take that initial amount of money and invest it in stuff, and that they now have so much money that they have started so many business fronts that half of the world around you is a scam funded by your own taxpayer dollars that are now working against you by some other definition, because some alphabet agency doesn't even need the seed money that you offer them every year annually, because they have lucrative industries like Apple and stuff like that. And info gathering sites like Facebook. I mean, these are things to consider. I mean, it's possible that there's folks out there lying to you folks.
It's likely.
Yeah, I mean,
everything.
Come on.
everything's a bold-faced lie at this point, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And until proven otherwise, it's amazing to me that people can spew any of the obvious propaganda that's coming out of the mass media now from either side.
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly.
It's becoming such an illusion down to, people themselves, like Joe Biden, like your sign back there says China owns Biden. That, I mean, that's true. And there's a lot of dots to connect there, that's for a different discussion. But what I'm getting at is, like, we're seeing a man on TV who looks different, appears different, sounds different. There's green screens involved. There's movie stages. It's like
People with masks on, clearly.
it's literally an illusion, and it's so easy to see.
I feel bad for this man that they have in this puppet role as president of the United States now. I don't understand the machinations precisely of the manipulations that he's under, but this is certainly a farce beyond anything we've ever seen before.
Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely.
It's almost like they want us to see. They want us to find out. Like, if you can step outside of the illusion and actually see what's going on, it is like that movie They Live. Like, you can literally see it all.
I can follow you, and in one breath, I want to hope that you're right. But in another angle, I'm concerned because it could also be presented as they're just slapping you in the face as they're bending you over as well. I mean, seriously, that's my concern right now, because in reality, I follow Newton's laws of motion, and I don't see things getting better at all. I see things getting worse for quite some time. That's the direction and the momentum. I hear a lot of people talking about having hope and thinking positively. But from my position currently, that's very stupid and naive to be thinking so positively as you're getting your ass handed to you in the battle.
Well, I don't disagree, because you look around and what you're saying is true.
We're getting our ass handed to us. We're losing our freedoms every second at this point, while people are talking about this possibility of some plan that's coming to function.
Yeah, and this is good to talk about, because we hear about this victory and we hear about this stuff taking place. And a lot of people
Ain't happening. Yeah.
Well,
ain't happening.
intuitively, people think, obviously this is like the dark before the light. It's always darkest before dawn. So it has to get worse. Everything has to come to the surface and be exposed. So everybody sees what's been going on the whole time. It's just now becoming more apparent. And this is just some type of this is what it's like a natural cycle, like every civilization goes through.
Or that little smoke screen story to keep everybody on their couches with a false sense of hope as Rome burns and they continue to lose their position. That's where I'm coming from right now. Is I'm letting folks know that there's an attack that they're not paying attention to. Things are worse than they've currently thought, and they need to get to action, because no one's coming to help them, because things are way worse than they've been presented. This hope is against what they've been presented. And I'm letting folks know they don't even know what's going on, because they haven't been presented what the real threat is even. They're just getting the circus, the song and dance, the pleasantries, the eat.
Okay, well, tell us what the real threat is then, buddy. That's why you're watching the stream.
Easy to digest stuff. And if they think that's a problem, that's just BS for them to chew on. That's distraction. Yeah. That's the stuff that they get to discuss that's within the margins. But there's a lot more that's going on outside of the margins. That's reality.
Well, let's just
the real stuff is all behind the scenes underground. Yeah.
Everybody talks about it in Antarctica. Oh, UFO this and weird thing in the ice that. Yeah, that's all cool. I'm not denying that any of the weird stuff that can be going on in Antarctica is going on. But here's the peculiar thing from my perspective. I'm providing brass tacks, real documents about real technological threats. Been doing so for quite some time. It's amazing to me that there's no traction on the topic. Stuff that absolutely can be proven today.
Yeah. Well, I've always imagined, like, every time they release a new variant or whatever happens, I just imagine, like, these elites or these CEOs sitting at their desk, their feet up on the desk, smoking a cigar, laughing like, oh, these idiots. But I always have that image in my head.
Useful idiots.
Right. I always have that image in my head.
Their own words, by the way.
Yeah, exactly.
Their own words. They call the masses useful idiots and useless eaters.
Yep.
Yeah. So
Their own words.
even if okay, like I'm not gonna just give up hope and think that this is over and it's like a lose for us. I don't whatever. That's just my opinion. I don't think that.
Oh, I'm nowhere near suggesting that.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to make the distinction of is that there's a difference between being in a fist fight, a knife fight, and a gunfight. And if I see my friends prepping for a fist fight, but I know it's a gunfight, I'm obliged to inform them.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to let the masses know, is that, I'm going to be straight. You knuckleheads think you're in a fist fight, but you're in a gunfight.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not aware of this technology. I'm letting folks know that they're way outclassed, they're way outgunned for where their perspective is. I'm not trying to say it's hopeless. What I'm saying is it is hopeless if you keep swinging punches in a gunfight, though.
Right. And honestly, the first step to all this is awareness. Like awareness is key.
Yes. There's directed energy weapon mind control devices that are active in the South Pole Station since at least 2010.
And probably
those devices can also manufacture earthquakes.
Interesting. So, okay. I have lots of questions.
Go for it.
But I like, okay, so we hear about victory and all this stuff, but I also like to talk about the real tangible stuff that we see happening, like that you just can't deny. It's like, I don't know, it's happening, right? You just can't deny it.
I don't know that anything's happening at all. To me, it's conjecture.
Okay.
I would like for you to be correct.
No.
I mean, very realistic, because I don't want people to be off target. If we're not winning, we're losing, and then we need to try harder.
No, you misunderstood me. I mean the stuff that we can actually see happening, like what you're talking about, like the potential threats.
Right. Yes. Oh, gotcha.
That's what I mean. Like it's silly to ignore all that stuff and to just tell ourselves like, oh, the white hats have control of it all, and then move on. We don't know that. Like this is just hearsay, and we have said this before that we believe that was the case. But as time goes on, nothing's black and white. Nothing's black and white.
I believe the white hats are of good intention. I believe if they were winning, we wouldn't have the president that we would have right now. I believe that shows that there was an election we lost. I don't believe that the white hats wanted Joe Biden to win the election. I don't buy into that. I don't believe that they needed to show us. I believe they could have shown us by arresting people and applying the laws that existed against the criminals that exist. I don't buy any of this for a second. I get the idea of placating the masses in the interim, though. I get that. It totally makes sense.
Yeah.
With that being said, we're watching a team that we're told, it's just like watching Monday Night Football. I trust that my team is going to win until they lose. Until the second half, they're behind by so many points where I have to start humbling myself to a guy that's wearing the jersey from the other side. At what point do we start humbling ourselves in the fight that we're watching right now to admit that our team is no longer winning?
Mm-hmm.
And then what do you do next?
Well, that's just it. Like that's everybody's question. What do we do about any of this stuff right now? And it's overwhelming to think about. And it's not about
step one is get off the couch.
Well,
it's not a game. It's not Monday Night Football. So step one is get off the couch.
And step two is don't live in fear either.
Absolutely.
Don't, because that's what they want. They want to control you with all this propaganda. Some of it is propaganda. Some of it is more fear mongering than anything. And while like other things you're talking about, like these directed energy weapons and things are actually happening behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, think about this. The only reason they're able to get away with what they're doing is because most people are following orders, they're obeying, they're living in fear, like you just said, and which, by the way, makes you more susceptible to the mind control and the propaganda when you're in a state of fear, because then I'll just do what I'm told because I want to be safe.
Mm-hmm.
and you're scared and you're not in your sovereignty at all. Not enough people are in their sovereignty and are living as sovereign beings and are believing lies without doing their own research on things. So many people are mind controlled just to believe what the authorities tell them is the truth and not look any further. And that's what every mainstream media or education system is all set up to propagandize us into this terrible system. And until you have the spark of, wait a second, how do I know any of this is true? I've never actually sought out the truth myself. Until you start doing that, you're going to just be living under all these lies, and then the media tells you, oh my God, this extremely deadly thing is happening. You have to do all this now, and you go, okay, and that's what you see so many people doing. So it's almost like so many people are so in a state of like sleep and giving their power away constantly and under all these lies.
How many years
Things have
did
to
you
get
gentlemen say that
things have to get so bad for them to snap out of that, right? Things have to get like so bad for people at that state to wake up. So
how many years would you gentlemen say we've been exposed to smartphones as a society?
A decade.
It's been what, 11, 12? How long has it been now? 12
Something
years?
like 12 years.
I feel like since the inception of smartphones, we've seen a decline in thinking. Would you agree?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, you look around and you can see that.
Yeah, that's it. But I wonder in that time period, like, so now folks like you and I we can agree and see that. But now people that are growing up in this time period, will they even understand what we're talking about? The people that when it comes time to think, they just grab a smartphone by design.
Yeah, well, there's like
so we have a whole generation of folks that are no longer thinking. We're watching the ability to cognitively discern information from our environment around us as true or not go away. People no longer believe they have the ability to know whether something is true or not. And that's being inculcated in our society.
Yeah. Well, and that's by design too. Like they muddy the waters with disinformation. So you hear all these different narratives going around, and then at some point you just don't know what to believe anymore, and that's what they want. They want you to just give up and go back into the matrix and just check out, and that's what we can't do. But
they want you to do a Google search anytime you don't know something, and they'll tell you the answer for the thing that you're trying to think about. What they certainly don't want you to do is think about and have your own answer.
They don't even want you to
don't research Google and what they may be manipulating in their agendas.
They don't even what scares me is like even sending an email now. You have options. It reads the email for you, and then you have options of replies. You don't even have to think or type. You're like, oh, this one sounds good. This sounds like something I would say. And then
this is how the AI programs us.
Exactly. And it's so convenient. I admittedly have used it before. I'm like, okay, I'll just say yes because that's what I was gonna say anyway. But I know I'm not the only one who's done that. But what you were saying earlier, like how many people have been dumbed down since smartphones? What's scary is the people being born into this right now. We all have a reference point of what life was like before the internet, before smartphones. We know we have a reference, right? We know what things were like, and we know how organic and real and tangible things can be, life can be. There's a new generation that has no concept of that.
You're right.
And they're the ones who are going to be manipulated. And they're the target audience right now. They're the target.
Oh, they won't even know. They won't even know the difference. You're being manipulated. They won't know the difference because you were privy to the activity of thinking, but you've already been compromised, like you just said, because you've been given the convenience of not thinking because the email offered you the answer that you were looking for anyway, which just shows that the AI functions correctly right now and assessed what you were going to say. In the future, it'll just give you what it wants you to say, and you won't be in a position to know otherwise. That's the end goal.
Exactly.
Because for now, it doesn't want us thinking. It'll conveniently give us what we want. Well, that's convenient.
Right.
But in time, when we lack the capacity to think anymore, we'll just simply react.
I'm going to change the subject.
Go for it.
And I want to go back to Antarctica because of something you said. You said that device, whatever they have going on down there, has the ability to cause earthquakes. What have you seen that makes you believe that or know that?
It was my understanding that the time period for which we went from construction of the ice cube neutrino detector to operations and maintenance was the season that I was present. And it was in the firing up of the system in its operations phase. If you look back in the time period that I was there, when they were turning this device on and getting it dialed in, was when the earthquakes were occurring in Christchurch, New Zealand.
Oh, interesting. So there's actual direct
accidental fire from the device as they were dialing it in. And if you follow the boards, I mean, I'm not a pro in all of this stuff per se, but there's a lot of folks that are out there that have been tracking signals coming out from that area across the world and saying that there's something going on down there and some device. Since the time period that I was there, I'm just letting folks know that there is a device and it does transmit, and I support what these other people are saying. They did find something. There's a large transmitter at the South Pole Station that's firing stuff out and can apparently cause earthquakes and a multitude of other nefarious things.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, just because there's no denying it. There's so much information out there on top of what you're telling us.
Yeah, it just is what it is.
When you connect the dots, it's impossible to ignore. And yeah, what was I going to say? Oh, see, you had mentioned, I think, the Antarctic treaties. Treaty being, has it ended?
It's about to, is my understanding. I believe it's in 2024 or 2025, I believe, is when it's supposed to expire.
So it's not over yet.
It's not over yet, but I find it interesting that there doesn't seem to be much chatter about needing to hammer out a new deal.
Yeah.
So there was, just for people who don't know, was it like 60 years ago? I don't know how. When do you know when it was signed?
I think it was around 1957 was my understanding that they got together and did the first Antarctic treaty.
And it was like 12 countries were setting aside. Basically,
prior to the treaty, there was a bunch of nations that had laid claim to the continent and were attempting to, I guess, colonize it in a way. But then with the Antarctic Treaty, what they decided to do,
peaceful purposes,
in a way,
that's what the definition was. I mean,
fair enough. It's a little bit more complex, because what they also stated was that they were going to also just, it was like a non-compete. So whatever you said your properties were before, we're just not going to argue it.
Okay.
So it's not as simple as folks think. So to say that it's simply we're there for peaceful and scientific purposes is really a technicality of legalese. It was really a whole bunch of people started laying claim to stuff. And then what they decided to do was they agreed to not argue. That's what's really going on in Antarctica.
And I heard that it started with 12 nations and now it's up to 54 nations.
That sounds fair.
And what does it mean when this is over?
I couldn't answer that.
Right.
It's an interesting contract that they all worked up. If they want to expire without a new contract, it means that everybody's going to go immediately back to what their previous claims were. The previous claims would stand. It's the State of the Union. That's why I'm surprised that there hasn't even been conversation yet. Because in lieu of a new contract, we just go back to the previous state of dispute.
Okay.
So with that being said, everyone could default back to their previous ownership and then start functioning accordingly, as well as a potential.
I got you.
And there's certainly a lot of wealth in that continent. It might be interesting if they just simply dissolve one contract and go to activity.
So is it true that China and other countries are building bases down there right now.
That is my understanding. I mean, I haven't physically been to a Chinese base, but it's my understanding that China's been building fast and furious.
And you mentioned this structure, this dome, whatever you want to call it, is hexagon shaped. And do you happen to know what color? Would it be black?
Looking and kissing each other.
It's
They're doing
it's
it all
embedded in the ice.
Yeah, I know
A series
that.
of cables.
other
It's
one,
not really color.
day.
The
Okay.
building that's in the middle of the facility is
You don't
blue.
have to say it like that.
Okay. Well, I don't know if you remember a few years back, Linda Moulton Howe had these two whistleblowers that came forward from Antarctica saying that there was a hexagon structure. And they were talking about they had been inside, and there's a whole story that goes along with it. And then there was other people out there saying, no, this isn't true at all because, you know, I've been down there and I know nothing about this. I was just curious. You're the first person I've heard say something about a hexagon since I've heard that testimony. That's why I'm just trying to connect those dots.
I totally hear where you're coming from. I appreciate that you're required to do something like you're doing. But from my perspective, like this is where I'm trying to come to the world, like what you're telling.
That hexagon, there's also a hexagon on the bottom of Saturn. There's a hexagon that all storms go around in Saturn.
Like Linda Moulton Howe had a guy that told a story about. He won't say his name. He has no pictures. He has no documentation. So to me, that's laughable.
Yeah. Well, I'm just
Got you. I mean, I totally got you. I'm no disrespect to you, sir. It's just this is peculiarity to me with the information that I'm coming out with, because I'm a person that's actually been there and can prove it. When somebody comes to me with a story about someone who claims this and claims that, to me, it's really funny. That information means nothing to me. It's a joke. I'm curious as to why people give weight to that versus what I'm saying.
well, I don't think that actually caught that. I don't think people gave that much weight. Like
I got you, but that's I got you. But from my perspective, that stuff's silly to me.
Well,
I
yeah,
have
and
the real facts. I wish people would pay attention to the real facts. That's my angle on this stuff.
and you know the reason, you know, supposedly that these whistleblowers remain anonymous is, you know, they would claim for their safety.
And I
But
find that hilarious.
I'm
I
like,
find
for
that
one,
hilarious. Yeah,
you think they really don't know?
I think that's
are.
hilarious. I think people should find that ridiculous because I went
Yeah.
there. I had
And you're
pictures
talking
video,
and you're publicly.
and I'm talking. So what's the discrepancy here, folks?
What's the difference?
What's
Exactly.
the difference? What's going on here? You guys are looking as journey to truth. Which
Mhm.
one's the truth?
it's a journey for sure.
It's certainly a journey,
Yeah.
but when people have to start to learn to apply discernment, here's a brass tacks moment, folks. Who are you going to believe? The guy that's been there and has pictures and video that can support what they're saying and documented it, started a website to prove it, or folks that are telling stories.
Mhm.
There are things known as COINTELPRO.
Yes.
There are folks that are designed to be out there muddying the waters.
Yeah.
It's up to you, the viewers, to figure out who's full of crap and who's not.
And a
All
lot
I
of
can do is provide the evidence of my experience and put it against the other folks out there. That's
Mhm.
all I can do.
Yeah. And a lot of the information that these COINTELPRO people is actually true or could be true, but then there's also a bunch of disinfo in there. So
Absolutely.
the best thing that, and this is what I've always done, is I take in all information. I don't believe it outright ever.
Mhm.
But I put it on the shelf. I say, okay, this is what this source is saying. And then if certain things line up with like somebody like you or other people, and it keeps lining up over and over, then I'm like, okay, that piece of
Probable.
information is probably true because it's coming through all these different sources. And then I know everything's compartmentalized. So just be
Guys, I might look for something else because he's not actually saying anything. He's just saying, why don't people believe me? So, I think we'll watch this one again.
When you add optional accidental damage to your Allianz home and contents insurance, you're covered for those unexpected mishaps. Search Allianz Home Insurance to get your quote today. Ah, Allianz.
When change happens, think Yui. If you're now working from home more, we don't have individual limits on how much we'll cover your home office equipment for. Yui, you insured.
The U.S. intelligence knows that Russia and China plan on a nuclear first strike. This war will be preceded, in my opinion, by an EMP strike. They intend to decapitate the U.S. military. We're looking at a Mad Max scenario, a very bad situation. Store shelves are going to be empty. There's going to be no water. Russia is indeed testing the West to see if they will stop him from taking back the former Soviet states, starting with Ukraine. I'm 100% certain we'll see a nuclear war. 100%. There's no doubt in my mind.
Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. So today on the channel, I have a very special guest. It's Joel Skousen. He's renowned in the preparedness community. He's the author of the book Strategic Relocation, and he's here to talk all about where you should be when it all hits the fan. Now, above and beyond that, he's also a political commentator, and I would say that his macroeconomic outlook is very on point. And one of the first videos I ever seen of Joel was back in 2013 when he predicted basically that in 8 to 10 years from now, we are likely going to be in a conflict with Russia. And of course, here we are today. So before we started the interview, Joel was mentioning how in order for people to know where the best place to be is when it all hits the fan, you kind of need to know what you're preparing for. So I'm hoping that he's going to take this hour that we have together and explain to us, you know, what are the threats right now that we're facing, and what is his outlook, what are his best guesses as to where this is going to go, and how we can best prepare. So, thanks for coming, Joel.
Good to be with you, Nate. You know, my father was born in Canada, so I have Canadian roots, and but you're in a very trying time now with the tyranny of Justin Trudeau. But, you know, a lot of people in America and Canadians as well are expecting an economic collapse. As an economist, I can tell you that you don't get an economic collapse ever unless it comes with war and occupation where you can't go to work anymore. If you just have a stock market crash, for example, or you go into a recession, even in the Depression, only 25% of people were out of work. I mean, this was not an economic collapse. It was devastating because there really wasn't a lot of stored food and residual earnings and wealth in American people. They were poor. They distributed over rural areas. That's why it was so hard felt, et cetera. But today they have a lot of stored wealth in the United States and Canada, as difficult as things are with the not hyperinflation, but inflation, high inflation that we're having. But these things do not cause us to get into a global new world order. The globalists have long used war, Nate, to advance the cause of globalism. That was the whole purpose of World War I, to get us into the League of Nations. And they had the Treaty of Versailles so onerous towards Germany that when the Treaty of Versailles was rejected by the United States Senate, the provisions of the Treaty of Versailles were so onerous that it guaranteed that Germany would rearm again and go to war again. That gave us World War II. We got the United Nations out of World War II. It doesn't have any enforcement power. It doesn't have any real military power. It doesn't have any taxing power. It doesn't even have the kind of regulatory power that the EU has, which is another form of globalism, more advanced. So they need one more world war to get us into a global world government. And this is the thing that I was predicting that in 2013 and even before. I prognosticated at that time that it would take them till about 8 to 10 years to get ready militarily to take on the West. I revised that in about 2018 and extended it further into the latter half of this decade, simply because Russia and China still are deploying their top generation stuff. They're just starting to deploy the hypersonic missiles. They still don't have, and they're starting to deploy the Sarmat 2, which 15 maneuvering warheads, etc. It's going to take another 5 years to build and deploy all of these things. Now, it doesn't mean that they strike in 5 years. I'm just saying that Russia and China are very wary of the United States military capability and NATO's military capability, as has been demonstrated in the Ukraine war. Everyone thought that because of Russia's massive artillery forces, that's how they generally run a conventional war, is they just blast the hell out of any army with massive artillery barrages, like you've seen in Mariupol and Severodonetsk, where they just leveled the city essentially with artillery. But everything else in the Russian military is broken. It doesn't work very well. It can't do complex air-ground coordination, which they showed in their failed invasion of Kiev. You couldn't give air defense over their convoys. Their convoys were on roads, which you never do in a massive invasion. You get off the roads and disperse. They don't have good friend versus foe identification in their aircraft, for example. So that if you get into a mixed aircraft, and I'm a former Marine Corps fighter pilot, so I know this stuff. But you have to know and be able to have electronic identification of friend or foe so that you know who you're going to launch missiles at. And they don't have that. And so it's been very, very difficult for them to send out fighters at the same time they've got missiles in the air, at the same time they've got drones in the air. And so what they do, they put the drones up and nothing else. They put the missiles up and nothing else. Whereas the US and NATO can do very complex, coordinated strike features, which Russia cannot do. So we have, in the military, completely revised our assessment of Russia. It's no longer the big
Take comfort and space to the next level. Mitsubishi Pajero Sport. Elevate your adventure. Hunted starts 7:30 Sunday on 10.
Doors are open, fugitives are on the run.
Did you disappear for 21 days?
They can go anywhere.
Without a trace.
One way or another.
powerful military that we thought they were. They can't hardly even take Ukraine. In fact, they can only get the Donbass so far, and it's almost at a stalemate. Now, they can't invade Europe. You know, there's a lot of talk about Russia invading Europe or the Baltics. Well, how can they do that? I mean, Europe is huge compared to the Ukraine. If you can't invade and occupy Ukraine, how can you do Europe, let alone the United States? So my military analysis is that, you know, where Russia is superior to the West is in nuclear throw weight in their ballistic missiles. The United States, for example, has a little over 400 Minuteman III missiles. Due to our stupid adherence to arms control treaties, we removed all 3 warheads from those and replaced it with a single warhead. Now, most Americans don't know that, and I'm sure Canadians don't know that. So the Americans have, in terms of ballistic missiles, we have 400 plus, maybe 425, because we shoot off 1 or 2 missiles every year to test them. And so we started out with 450, and now we're down closer to 400. So Americans don't realize we've only got 400 nuclear missiles to throw at Russia if they should attack us. Russia has over 3,000 warheads mounted on missiles. And now they're doing maneuvering warheads, which cannot be intercepted by our Patriot missile systems or the Aegis missile system. Our anti-ballistic missile systems have no warhead on them. They have a kinetic warhead, meaning a big lump of titanium or depleted uranium that has to make physical contact with the incoming warhead. That's impossible with the new maneuvering warheads at hypersonic speeds. And the US had about a 50% kill rate, even under the best of testing conditions. of that. But you see, we are extremely vulnerable. Now, it's my opinion that Canada will not be a nuclear target of the war. Only the US military will be. But this war will be preceded, in my opinion, by an EMP strike. And because most of Canada and most of the population of Canada is within 50 to 100 miles of the US border, you're going to get the effects of that EMP strike, and your grid is going to go down as well. And so that's a very serious thing, because you see, within 3 to 5 days after the grid goes down, especially in big cities, you're going to talk about major pillaging. Store shelves are going to be empty. There's going to be no water. There's going to be no sewer. There's going to be no imported food. I even doubt a lot of policemen are going to come to work if there's mobs roaming the street and threatening their families. Would you come to work? You know, if there are mobs coming down the street, you'd stay and protect your family. And so I think we're looking at a Mad Max scenario, a very bad situation. And the nuclear strike that I'm anticipating follows about 15 to 20 minutes after the EMP strike. Now, an EMP strike takes about 8 or 9, even possibly 10 nuclear weapons to blanket the entire American and Canadian grid. It's not just one, so forget about Iran, forget about North Korea. It's either Russia or China or both. But the problem that Russia has in using nuclear weapons, a lot of armchair pundits are talking about Russia taking out military base in Ukraine.
Yeah, Han, I've been going a while actually. After this one, I'm going to hang up. This has got 40 minutes to go, so I'm going to hang up after this one and do a proper show tomorrow. We've got Mike from around the world, so yeah.
And as a blackmail thing and saying, if you want more of this, then just try to fight me. But this isn't true at all. With nuclear weapons today, it's either all or none, Nate. In other words, you either launch them all and take down everything in the US and NATO inventory, or you don't do it at all. You don't throw a nuclear weapon out at the sub base in Scotland, for example, in the UK, or any of the bases, the submarine bases in France. Because you see,
I lent on the bloody remote again.
what do you do after you've done that? What do you do if the United States and NATO doesn't submit?
Tyro's 61,000 customers always stay ahead of change. With our retail friendly
Submit to the blackmail, and they wouldn't with only one thing. What would you do? You can't occupy. He doesn't have the military enough to occupy Ukraine, let alone all of Europe, so he can't march in with troops. And it would demand, the public would demand a massive nuclear retaliation. And 400 missiles can do a lot of damage if they're targeted at Russian military headquarters. Now, we also have about 14 nuclear submarines, but only about 5 or 6 of those are deployed at sea at any one time. And that's a weakness. But a lot of people don't realize that the warheads on those submarine launched ballistic missiles are relatively small. They cannot penetrate hardened targets. And so they're really only good against cities, and that's not our nuclear doctrine to nuke cities. We need the larger warheads mounted on the ICBMs to hit hardened targets like Yamato Mountain, an underground city in the Ural Mountains that is about the size of the Washington, D.C. metro area underground. And we have never had inspectors in there. But we know that they're manufacturing military facilities. They have bunker systems in there. I mean,
Would you say the bombers are useless? Like this day and age, are they almost obsolete, or?
they aren't obsolete because from a distance they can launch cruise missiles. And but Russia has probably the most sophisticated anti-missile system in the S-400 and the S-500 systems. They can shoot down a lot of those cruise missiles. Warheads, if you even have a nuclear warhead on a cruise missile, is very small. Can't do a lot of damage to hardened military targets. I mean, you can take out air bases and other things. You mass enough of those. And our bombers can penetrate up to a certain distance, but you know, Russia's a big territory. You can't go into the middle of Russia and then come back without air refueling, and you're not going to be able to do that with their anti-missile system. So we really depend on missile systems to do it, and we are really way behind. The United States has a ballistic missile on the table, which they're supposed to have by 2030. I am anticipating this world war will happen before 2030, just because the Chinese and Russians know that a new missile is coming, and they're going to want to strike before that new missile is deployed, because it will be much more sophisticated.
Do you think there's a possibility that, because I'm starting to question whether or not the use of a low yield tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine would actually elicit a major response from NATO, or would people just quickly acclimate to the idea of these low yield tactical nukes being utilized in combat? Because it seems like it's not, I'm not sure if I'm totally sold on the idea that NATO would immediately respond with the full force of their military capability with the, you know, the use of one of these smaller weapons that Russia has in large amounts. What do you think about tactical nukes?
Well, in the first place, no explosion in Ukraine is going to elicit a NATO response, especially if it's nuclear. Now, we're talking about a limited ballistic missile nuclear attack on one of the NATO countries. That would demand a response. You're not going to accept a nuclear strike on a base that's going to kill a lot of civilians as well without responding. That's not the case in Ukraine. Ukraine isn't even going to be allowed to join NATO. Putin, when he came to power, has decided now to start to reestablish the Soviet Union, and Ukraine was first on his list of retaking. Now, they didn't have to retake Belarus because Belarus never did give up its communist past. But they went for Ukraine because Ukraine, you see, has most of the industrial power. They've created most of the ICBMs in the Soviet days were built in Ukraine. And they gave those up. But still, it's a military industrial powerhouse that Russia wants back. And it's also the grain capital of the Soviet Union. And so they want to capture all of those things. And most of those things, by the way, are in eastern Ukraine. And so Russia has succeeded in getting most of those. I'm not sure they're going to be able to get past that. But the important thing to remember out this war is that Russia is indeed testing the West to see if they will stop him from taking back the former Soviet states, starting with Ukraine. And I'm glad, even though I'm opposed to all the globalist and neocon intervention in all of the world, in the phony war on terror, and that was a phony war as well. What Americans and Canadians don't know about our own deep state and the phony wars that we've been involved in. But the deep state is, in fact, prosecuting properly with arms and ammunition this war in Ukraine, because they know that we're very, very close to World War III. And I always told people in my World Affairs Brief, this is my geopolitical newsletter I put out every Friday. I told people the deep state and their controlled media will protect Russia and China and downplay the threat during the Soviet years and as China's building up. And they have been downplaying China. That's why they got all of this trade agreements with China and part of the World Trade Organization. We built their military by allowing them to gain billions of dollars in trade. We allowed China to build, and our government knew that. They need these enemies to start a World War III. And here's how they intend to get Americans into this new world order. The United States knows through their spies in Russia and China that Russia and China do not intend to do a first strike on American cities. They intend to decapitate the US military, that first strike. And in 1997, our own deep state talked President Bill Clinton into signing a completely revamped US nuclear strategy. The Reagan doctrine was to structure our nuclear forces as to win a nuclear war. They changed all of that in 1997 and restructured the military to absorb a nuclear first strike and then retaliate afterwards. Now you think about that, Nate. From a nuclear point of view, one who launches, if you have launch on warning, you can see within 20 to 30 minutes, our satellites can tell when Russia and China are launching missiles at the United States. We can launch our missiles before their missiles arrive. And so their missiles hit empty silos, and our missiles are already in the air and hit live targets. So you see, in a launch on warning scenario, one who launches second wins. But without launch on warning, we get decapitated. And so it's incredible. And I'll tell you, I went on Art Bell, and just after that had happened, and I was telling about PDD-60, and he didn't believe me. So I pulled it up on the Arms Control Today website. Now, PDD-60 is Presidential Decision Directive 60. It's still top secret. But because the Washington Post came out and said, oh no, it's all right, don't worry, we can still launch on warning, Arms Control Today, who helped write it, as big disarmament experts that they are, they came out and said, oh no, you can't launch on warning. And so they revealed an article by Craig Cernillo, November 1997, armscontroltoday.org. It's still in the archives. You can still read it. He said, no, you can't launch on warning. The order says that American missile forces have to absorb the nuclear first strike and then retaliate as a gesture of goodwill to the Soviet Union that we are not a threat. Now, it's interesting that, how should I say, one of the prominent disarmament experts, Bruce Blair, came out about 6 months ago and said, you know what we need to do with the Biden administration is to revamp our nuclear doctrine to stop launch on warning. And I said to myself when I first read that, I said, wait a minute, doesn't he remember PDD-60? And so I called up Arms Control Today and I said, you know, has PDD-60 been repealed? What is Bruce Blair? I mean, Arms Control Today should know. Bruce Blair is saying we need to get rid of launch on warning, and I'm telling him it's already gone. PDD-60 has never been repealed. It's still top secret. Our military forces practice launch on warning, but they're not going to be allowed to launch on warning. Why is that? Why do the globalists want to absorb it? Right? Because the entire West, Canada, the US, and NATO depend on the US military to protect it. If it's decapitated, our leaders come out of their bunkers and they say, oh, we didn't know this was going to happen. Of course, that's a lie. But now that our military is decapitated, we must join together with other Western countries and have a militarized global government to prosecute war. It's the perfect excuse. COVID won't get you a military government, but a war will, and a decapitation of US military power will get you into a militarized global government. That's why I think it's there.
I don't know if I entirely agree with the theory, but in line with your theory, the idea would be that once they had taken out the military bases, then they would have the leverage of holding the cities hostage with the difference of nukes that would exist. That obviously the Russians and the Chinese would have much more nukes left after the smoke cleared. So I think that's what you're suggesting, right?
That's exactly right. The U.S. intelligence knows that Russia and China plan on a nuclear first strike. They know that they plan to hit military targets, not civilian targets, and they're going to use blackmail to get us to succumb and give them control over a new world order. You know, a lot of stupid conservatives in the United States who are anti-globalist, which is good, think that anything the globalists are against, like in the war on terror, must, you know, they correctly said Iraq was not our enemy. Correctly said Afghanistan was not our enemy. We made them the enemy. And so they incorrectly now state, and Ron Paul, a good friend of mine, is one of those who says this, is that Russia and China are not our enemy. We've made them enemies because we're provoking them. Well, in fact, they are our enemies. They do intend to strike the West. It's just that you know, libertarians and anti-globalists in the United States tend to be blind to the fact that there are real enemies out there. Now, I'm as anti-globalist as anybody on this planet, but I'm also anti-Russian and anti-Chinese because I know that they're planning on striking the West. Now, here's the question for you, Nate. Why would our globalist government absorb a nuclear first strike? How could they win a war if they did absorb a nuclear first strike? How could they prosecute the war? Because it would take time to regroup under a military New World Order. Well, I think part of the answer is the fact that I think we have weaponized space. One of the former defense secretaries under Ronald Reagan spoke at a closed session of one of the big accounting firms. And he said this to the session, and it was leaked out later. He said, you'd be surprised how much money is going to space that isn't on the budget. He said there's $20 trillion going into space that isn't on the budget. $20 trillion. Now, everything that's going into space that we know about, GPS satellites, surveillance satellites, all of those things are on the budget. If there's 20 additional trillion going into space, it means those are anti-ballistic missiles, I think, that are there so that the US can say or thumb their nose at the blackmail and say, no, we're not going to accept your blackmail. And then they can shoot down any weapon that China and Russia tries to launch on cities after that first military strike, because space-based weapons can hit those missiles in their boost phase before they launch their warheads. You see, you can't stop the warheads. We don't have the wherewithal to do that. But you can hit the missile as it is its slowest apex, so that you can actually stop any future nuclear attack on America and give us time to rebuild under a New World Order. And that's why I think that's how I think we lose our liberty. And Canada will get into it just like the United States. It's not just the US.
You're suggesting that they would use this as an opportunity to impose some kind of martial law or something like that?
Well, there will be martial law when there's an EMP strike and a nuclear strike on US military targets. I mean, guaranteed. If there's no electricity, there's no order, and there's a Mad Max pillaging, you're going to have martial law. And so,
Innovative companies start in the garage.
True story.
What's that? Diamonds?
You are thinking small.
Pixels?
Think bigger.
Now that's electric.
Come on, it's magic.
Nice garage, by the way.
well, you don't want to have to relocate for safety if you wait until that EMP strike. In the first place, all the freeways and the roads are going to be clogged with people trying to get out of the cities. It's going to be too late. You have to have advance notice. And, even if it's the 20 minutes when you see all the lights go out with an EMP strike, there's going to be nuclear strikes on American military targets within 20 minutes. Start getting out now. You've got to have prepared places to go to, of course, to be able to, properly defend yourself. And as I've said in my book, Strategic Relocation, your greatest enemy is population density. If you're in the middle of Ottawa, trying to get out of that city, and or Calgary, any of those cities, is going to be like people getting out of, when the hurricane hit New Orleans. I mean, it was just, the freeways were clogged. There was just no way to go anywhere. And then you're in a sea of freeway locked in, and you're out of gas, and you end up being on foot, and that's just no way to prepare.
What are some considerations for people on the topic of strategic relocation? Like, what are some of the fundamental principles? You talked about population density. Is there other, primary considerations a person should factor into, because you're talking about this happening within, before 2030. So clearly, a person still has some time to get their ducks in a row and get prepared. So, like, where would the ideal place be? And we know that all locations have pros and cons. Like, some places, it's tropical, but there's hurricanes, and, there's lots of people. California, the weather's great, but there's so many people. You come up here, there's low population density, but there's not much food, and there's a short growing season. So
where does a person go in this kind of situation? And of course, there's other things to consider, like I'm sure you're going to talk about with military targets and this and that. So,
well, in my book, Strategic Relocation, it's North American Guided Safe Places, and I do cover all of Canada as well. And so in the Canadian section, I do list all the potential nuclear targets. Now, there are some significant military bases. I don't think they have to be taken out, except for the fact that the U.S. might want to use them if their bases are taken out. So because there are, some Air Force bases with long runways and things, those might be cratered. There might be some military attack. There are no Canadian ICBM targets to hit, but you have in Montana and North Dakota, just across the border, huge amounts, hundreds of ICBM targets that will be hit with 2 to 3 nuclear weapons each just to assure a kill. So there's going to be a massive amount of fallout if the wind is coming from the southwest, like prior to a cold front, then you're going to get fallout in Canada. And so here are some of the criteria that you need to understand, I think, in terms of relocation. Number one, you got to prepare to get out of the cities. If you try to prepare within one of the major metro areas, even if you have a basement, I don't know, do many cities have basements or in Canada?
yeah, they do. Most do. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. Because there are places in the United States like Texas and things with this hard pan soil that they just don't do basements, and they don't do basements in California. They do in a lot of the good survival areas like Idaho, Utah, Montana, and Wyoming, and the Midwest. But basements are very, very important because you have to have, I think, because of this is going to be a nuclear war, and fallout tends to go from west to east. Everyone's going to have some risk at fallout. And unless you're right on the coast of British Columbia, where there's no nuclear targets except clear out of Japan, you may not need a nuclear fallout shelter. But in my book, The Secure Home, I talk about how to secure yourself in a shelter. It's not just fallout. You need a place to hide yourself, your food storage, your weapons, your ammunition. Now in Canada, you don't have much opportunity to have weapons and ammunition. You do have some, in hunting and things, and you want to take advantage of that while you can to stockpile as much as you can about that. Because in a Mad Max scenario, your first strategy is to get out of the way. If there's a mob of people coming down the street, or even if you're in a rural area coming down the road, they're just starving people. You don't want to shoot people because they're starving. You want to just get out of the way. And that takes basement space with concealed entrances so that you can't find you. They can come in, you leave the doors open. They don't break open everything. They steal little things you leave left in the cupboards, and then they move on. That's one of the best strategies. But ultimately, people will have to deal with point threats. That is, dedicated bad people that come up in a pickup truck, and they're going to pillage and rape and kill people. Those people you want to be prepared to defend yourself against if you have to. That's one of the major disadvantages of Canada, though, is the restrictions against weapons. And it's very, very sad because now they're even talking about, confiscating what weapons that you have. And I feel certain that you're going to have a total gun confiscation like they have in Australia fairly soon in Canada.
Yeah, it's possible. Because of the big game we have up here, it will be hard for them to justify a full gun ban, but I think they will make a case for the eradication of semi-autos.
Right.
And
it'll just be bolt action hunting rifles, and they'll be registered, licensed, and checked. And boy, it's going to be highly restricted.
You talked a bit about military bases being primary targets. What about, if we are going to go into this situation, where does horticulture fit in to all this? Are you encouraging people to stockpile stuff more than regenerate, or should that be a part of people's plan to have to grow their own food?
I believe they do, and I myself lived that life. We started a family farm. We have a full range of animals, crops, and other things that we do. We're almost totally self-sufficient with our fuel supplies and generators and solar systems and other things like that. But I just spoke at the Exit and Build conference in Texas, which is about self-sufficiency and self-sufficient communities, where you learn to share. Now, I am not a big fan, by the way, of survival communities. They almost always break apart because of infighting. You know, one or two people have more money than the rest, and they run out of funds, and they want them to pay for everything, and you know, they want you to fund things. It just is a mess when you live with common property and you try these sharing relationships. What I find works best is, first of all, let me just say, everyone who can should develop a rural farm retreat if you can. That's the best place, is to get rural where you can grow. And I say that because let's suppose you have a nice suburban house in Calgary. Sure, you got a garden in your backyard, you may have enough room, etc. But I'll tell you, everybody's going to be starving with no electricity, and no food's going to be shipped in from BC or California or anywhere else. Those tomatoes that you're growing in the backyard are going to be picked clean before they're even green. So you want to get rural enough that you can grow with some anonymity where you can get away. And that's why I say specifically, even though some territories in Canada are better than others, you want to look for a micro location that meets these criteria. First of all, you kind of want to be off a major paved road. You don't want to be on a busy secondary road or visible from it, because that's where refugees will flow. And if your house is visible, when they're hungry or they're out of food, they're going to come to your house. So you want to get off the paved roads, long driveways, into the woods, etc., so that you're not visible. You're not the house, the first house that they're going to see. You want to make sure you have basement space. You want to try to get independent water, have a well. Even if you've got access to county or city water, try to get a well or a cistern. If you don't have a well, I believe in underground buried cisterns, whereby you can fill up 1,500 gallons, and you have a pipe that comes into your basement from that with a pump on it, and you can pressurize your own plumbing system with that cistern water. You know, the plumbing codes doesn't allow a mixing of two different water systems, but you can still do it on the sly, you know, if you could do it yourself. A lot of those things are covered in my book, The Secure Home. And even though I don't ship to Canada because of the Canadian problems, people can get PDF copies electronically of all of those on my website, joelskousen.com. And they're half price for the PDF version of all my books.
Yeah, we'll post links to those in the description for sure. One of the things that I'm hearing here is, you know, getting a place for retreat. So obviously a lot of people are going to have obligations in the city. You know, they can't just uproot their lives. I mean, there's that, what is it, like 80% of people are urban, probably even more than that nowadays. So I'm sure a lot of my viewers, you know, they're apartment dwellers. You know, even myself, you know, I got to be in and around a city as well. And so it's kind of difficult to fully, you know, uproot one's life and move out into the country. But what I'm kind of hearing from you is, you know, an option there, if a person has the means to do so, is just to get a retreat, a cabin, or something like that where they can go if it gets bad, and it doesn't necessarily entail a complete, you know, moving of your life and, you know, having to take your kids out of school. And you know, some people want to homeschool. Not everybody has the ability to do that. So is there any other, like, let's say a person had to bug out, you know, is there considerations for that? Do you discuss that in the book?
I do. I do. I do. And here's the general strategy. First of all, if you've got to stay in the city, get to the periphery of the city. Don't be in the middle of the city. You want to be, if things start to melt down, you want to be on the outside of the city so that you can be one of the first ones out on the road to get to your retreat. So we're talking about a two-step retreat process here. A semi-suburban home in the rural outskirts of the city, so that you're still within distance of a reasonable commute. And, you know, and try to work from home or try not to work in downtown, because if you're working in downtown, even if you live on the periphery, you may not be able to get home, if the crisis happens. But I believe that if you've got a basement, and one of my books is called the High Security Shelter book, it's got architectural plans about how to do a cement block shelter within an existing basement and how to conceal it, so that you wall off a portion of the basement so that you've got someplace to hide. That's just in case you can't get to your retreat, or you have to wait until all the traffic jams get cleared before you can get out of town. You want to have those two options of being able to have a home that you've got some stockpiles in and a safe room that's concealed so that you can at least weather the storm for a couple of weeks while things clear out a little bit, and then make your move to a retreat, especially if it's some distance away, which it should be, because refugee flows, once they pillage the cities, will eventually start going then out into the rural areas. And that's why I say you kind of want to be off the beaten track, down a long gravel driveway rather than on a major secondary road.
And what is your thoughts on bunkers? We have Ron from Atlas Survival on the channel quite often, and he builds some of these safe rooms that you're talking about. Although I don't know, I'm sure some of his clients conceal them. And that's a very interesting idea to have a concealed panic room, because I think a lot of people would say that, well, you're never going to. Some people would call it like a grave, or a bunker. The common criticism is that, well, you're going there to die, you're going to be cornered, people are going to find a way in, or find a way to smoke you out or something like that. But I think the idea of concealment is where I think your idea is has merit, and I've actually I went out to look at this retreat recently, because I'm in the market for some land right now. And I noticed in this house, it must have been preppers, because they had this room, tucked away, which was clearly like it was still kind of under construction. And I seen what they were trying to build like a secret room in the basement that didn't have a door access, or perhaps had one of those like hidden, hidden where you pull the book and the thing opens up or something like that, like in the movies. So I think that idea does have merit for people who have the resources to do it, right? But if a person
actually it's cheaper and safer than your variable shelter. If you buy a tank shelter, a metal steel shelter, and it comes in on a truck and a crane, first of all, everybody in the neighborhood is going to know you've got one.
Yeah.
It's very hard to conceal those things, and they're very obvious. And here's the problem. You plant this thing in the backyard, and you've got a hardened entrance and there's a glass door, etc. But you've got vents that come up out of the ground. You've got to have ventilation. And those can be sabotaged, you see. And if everyone knows there, what happens if you go out to get into your bunker and suddenly you got 15 neighbors camped around the entrance? How do you get in? That's why I say, if you use one of those things, then put a building on top. And better yet, connect the building to your garage or something so that you don't have to go outside to get into your shelter. And if you do all of that, it's actually better to build a basement and put the building on the basement. Then you get stand-up height, get more room for your money on basement space than you do in a round circular tank shelter, where everything has to be custom fit to those curved surfaces. And it's even better when we do remodeling design, for example, we add on to a garage, and a garage is an ideal place to put a safe room because no one expects there to be a basement below the garage. And so you build a reinforced ceiling of concrete over the shelter, and that becomes your garage floor. And that gives you radiation protection, but nobody thinks of there being a basement in their garage. And so it's a very good concealment technique.
And is that compliant with codes in a lot of places to actually build under the garage?
Yeah. Well, let me put it this way. There's no code for a fallout shelter. Every room that's habitable, they want windows and ventilation and doors, and you can't have that in a shelter. So what you do, you design it simply as storage space. That's legal. Okay, and it's even legal to have ventilation in storage space. It's even legal to have a drain that eventually you can put a toilet on and other things later. You see what you do, you design just a concrete basement with drains and ventilation under a garage. And, you know, the ceiling has to be engineered so that it withstands the weight of the cars, et cetera, and span. And then you fill it in later after you get your building permit, your occupancy. Then you fill it out. You put in your bathrooms and your sleeping rooms. And there's a lot to designing a safe room and a shelter, for example. People don't think about the fact that you need at least 2 separate sleeping areas. Because if you have people coming into the shelter with bratty kids that are whining and crying, they're going to drive everybody crazy. You want to be able to put them away in a room that's soundproof and they don't destroy everybody's goodwill. Or if somebody's sick and vomiting, etc., you want to put them in a sick room where they, you know, you got to think those things through when you're doing a safe room. You can't just have 20 people in one big room trying to sleep on the floor. It's just people gets on the nerves. You got to have obviously self-sufficient electricity inside a safe room. You got to have your own batteries, your own inverter. You don't have to even have solar panels to recharge it. You can get batteries now, lithium ion phosphate batteries that'll last you months without having to recharge, enough to keep your ventilation and lighting and cooking going on.
You make a good point about, you know, psychological well-being and how quickly people will break under those conditions, especially obviously if it's a stressful a scenario as we're talking about, you know, on top of it having to live in close quarters with people. You know, I don't know if you've ever been in a submarine. I mean, I haven't, but from what I hear, it can be you know, quite the experience that a person needs to condition themselves for. And, you know, making that space for the psychological breathing room for people, I think has a lot of merit, even if it's just a simple wall dividing, you know, one from the other, like you're saying, out of sight, out of mind, because one person can quickly have a lot of influence over the rest of the group, and, you know, and
cause a lot of tension. And boy, I tell you, nerves can fray and other things, especially if people get sick. You know, if they come into a shelter and they've been exposed to some radiation, not enough to kill them, but they're going to get sick, you're really talking some difficult situations that you have to be prepared for. Now, I don't want to scare people to say, you know, it's just futile, why try? The point is, in a nuclear war, look at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. 50% of people lived. They wish they were dead, but they lived. They got sick. They didn't die, even though they wanted to die. That's what you have to realize. In a nuclear war, you may just say, well, we're all going to die. No, that isn't true. You're just going to get sick and wish you were dead. Just like a city. A lot of people say, well, I can't leave the city. Well, let me tell you this. When an EMP strike's coming, you're going to be leaving the city under very duress conditions. All right? You're going to be leaving city in a panic. You may be leaving with only the clothes on your back. So what's more difficult? Leaving now, or preparing, or getting another job, or, you know, as difficult as all that may be, it's imminently easier than waiting until this strike comes and then having to flee and become a refugee like everyone else. You see what I'm saying?
I guess it's a gamble, right? Because there's no guarantees that it's going to happen, but you're saying that you think the likelihood, and, you know, I definitely take what you're saying seriously, because, you know, you made that prediction in 2013, which, you know, I mean, that's not to say that, you know, everybody's going to make an accurate prediction each time, but, you know, it's a gamble, right? Preparedness is like insurance. It's a gamble. So there's some level of preparedness that some people might say, well, that's a little over the top, you know, and then there's another level of preparedness, which is just common sense. But you're pretty certain that the only outcome of this global power struggle is going to be a conflict, a nuclear war.
In fact, I'm 100.
Aussie pistachios. Always.
100% certain we'll see a nuclear war. 100%. There's no doubt in my mind. And the reason is, you look at what Russia and China are building. They don't build those weapons for nothing. Those are not defensive weapons. Those are all offensive weapons. And in another 5 years, China will have as many weapons as Russia has, just like their military is bigger than our military right now. Now, one of the reasons why Russia will not attack over the Ukraine issue is he has to wait till China is ready and they both attack. Because you see, China's got the manpower to occupy that Russia does not. And I think the trigger event for World War III will be in Korea, not Ukraine, not Taiwan. We don't have any troops in Taiwan. If they take Taiwan, we'll beat our chest and condemn them for it. And we can't even do sanctions to China because 80% of our consumer goods come from China. So you see, they're sanction proof. But I'll tell you, if North Korea invades South Korea, we have 47,000 troops there, and we have to militarily intervene. And we'll probably have to use tactical nukes because North Korea has 1 million troops and South Korea has 50,000 and we've got 47,000. And you can't stop a 1 million man invasion and 60,000 artillery tubes shooting artillery rounds into Seoul without tactical nuclear weapons. And that would give China an excuse to say, you started it, and nuke the US military. That's what I foresee as the likely trigger event. So if you see a war in North Korea start, you may have 2 to 3 weeks before we see World War III. That's a good deal of warning to be able to get out of town. But you need to make preparations before then, or it isn't even enough time. You know, there's a lot of good people in the major urban areas because of jobs. But I can tell you after the CMP strike, there will be no jobs. The job is gone. So don't stay in the big cities because of family. Don't stay because of a job. Within 3 to 5 years, I'm predicting, you won't ever see that job again. If you haven't prepared to be semi-self-sufficient and to grow some food, and to establish them somewhere, you're going to be rural. You're not staying in the city. You're going to go rural. So you better prepare and find a place with friends or family or somebody who's out in the countryside. I can't be more serious about that warning.
Yeah, I have a T-shirt that says "Go off grid now because soon you won't have a chance." So it's kind of in line with what you're saying.
And think of what's available here. You've got inverters, you've got batteries available, you've got solar panels available. They won't be available once the CMP strike comes. Nothing's going to be. You won't be able to order a single thing.
So with this North Korea tension, do you think it would be a situation whereby the North Korea was provoked, or would it be North Korea just finally reaches the point where they're ready to imperialize the South, or like how would that start?
Remember that North Korea is a complete puppet state of Red China. Complete puppet state. They won't make any move until China says we're ready to take on the West. When China gives them the go-ahead, Kim Jong-un's going to attack South Korea. Unification. They keep talking about it all the time. We've got to be unified. Just like China with Taiwan, we've got to be unified. We've got to take Hong Kong. We've got to take Taiwan, and they will do it. They'll probably take Taiwan this year, and it will not lead to World War III, in my opinion, because I do not think we'll defend Taiwan.
And you
have to defend South Korea.
Yeah.
We have 47,000 troops there.
That's a good point. And I will say, I'd encourage people to watch some of your other interviews because you have some views which are fairly non-conventional in this space, in this alternative space, where a lot of people talk about, the collapse of the US dollar, and you make some arguments against that prospect, of course, with the Taiwanese situation and whatnot. So I would definitely encourage people to take a look at some of your other interviews. I know we're a little pressed for time because I know you got to get going, but I wanted to ask you one more question about what do you know about what other countries are doing to prepare for this possibility? I talked to Peter Pry recently. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him.
Yes, I am.
Yeah, and he was talking a bit about, the bunker systems in Russia and their preparations. What do you know about or have you heard, I guess, about government preparations for you know, what could potentially come to pass. Like, what are they doing? How deep are they digging?
Well, the United States government is preparing more than any other government in terms of deep underground bunker systems, new bunker systems. Now, we know about Mount Weather and all the other, and so do the Russians, and they know those things are going to get plastered. They have new bunker systems under high-rise buildings in Washington, D.C., you know, and that's where all of the congressmen and their families, et cetera. They have new bunker systems out in Utah. They have new bunker systems out in Colorado. That the government, you know, the Russians hopefully don't know about. But believe me, they know this is coming. And that's why they're preparing. And that's why people who retire from the FBI and the CIA, what are they doing? They're building survival homes and things in Colorado and Wyoming and other things. Some are even stupid enough to go to New Zealand. They don't realize that New Zealand and Australia are going to get occupied by the Chinese. The Chinese have to take Japan, Philippines, all the way down through to provide this wall. Just like the Japanese tried to do during World War II, the Chinese will follow suit. And that's why Australia is really, and New Zealand, going to be a problem countries. To have given up their arms, you know, to disarmament is really a.
It's interesting because a lot of the Silicon Valley types are buying up properties in New Zealand as kind of a refuge for, you know, what we're talking about.
It's not going to work out. They're going to be trapped. And you don't want to live under Chinese occupation.
Well, that might be why a lot of these Silicon Valley guys are trying to stay in China's good books, because they know the writings on the wall.
It won't work. I'll tell you, the Chinese, I covered in my World Affairs brief the speech of General Hao Tian, the former defense minister. He said, this was a leaked speech to the Epoch Times, who were anti-communist Chinese. And he said, you know, we're not going to be easy on the West like Hitler was. We're going to be ruthless. Anybody who thinks that they're going to be treated nicely by the Chinese, like Trudeau, and is inviting Chinese military, you know, to come and do operations in Canada, he's going to be the first one eliminated.
Well, let's hope everything works out. Let's hope it doesn't happen. I'm praying you're wrong, Joel. I'm praying you're wrong.
Let me just say one other thing, Nate. My experience with Trump in the United States. Now, Trump had good intentions. He really wants to make a better country, but he is clueless about how to determine who's deep state and who isn't. That's why he just couldn't drain the swamp. But I'll tell you, as a survival expert, I can tell you, if you give people any hope at all that it's not going to come, they will not prepare. If you give them hope that there's a Donald Trump that will save them, they will not prepare, because it's hard, it's costly, it's time consuming. They're always looking for an excuse. They're looking for hope that it won't happen. Let me tell you, don't have any hope that this war is going to happen. If you prepare, you're going to survive it. That's your hope. But do not hope this isn't going to happen, because Russia and China are not preparing, and our own deep state in your country and mine are preparing to get us into a tyrannical world government, and it's going to happen. These people already control both our governments. So don't hope, don't be optimistic, be pessimistic and prepare. My brother always said it pays to be a pessimist, because if you're wrong, everything's fine. But if you're right, you're prepared.
Everything's still fine. Yeah. All right. Well, there you have it, folks. Joel Skousen, thanks for coming on. And we'll post some links in the description to your Amazon book.
Okay, guys, I'm gonna bail. It was a bit disjointed today. I didn't really plan the stream properly. I'll do it better tomorrow. Okay, guys, see ya. Thanks for watching.